Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So I'm here in, I think this is technically Pontoon Beach. At the Flying J, just dropped off over at the Hershey's in Edwardsville here. Just waiting to see if I can get another load. I've seen no beaches, nor have I seen any pontoons, but I'll just have to take their word for it. So anyway, today is July 14th, and it is I can't do this math, but it's Bastille Day. Bastille Day is the French, it's like the French 4th of July, but way more dramatic. Like, they didn't just write some stuff down and post it, you know, and although we were already in the revolution, already in the fighting when the Declaration of Independence was written. But Bastille Day is when a bunch of French people stormed this prison called the Bastille, and they were demanding like guns and ammo from like the guards and everything. What? No, you can't get the charger. I'm charging my phone right now, and I'm doing a Tim Travels show.
Hey!
All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, my phone has priority for the charger. You should have brought your own. Okay. So, 1789, they stormed the Bastille demanding guns and ammo, and then they basically break into the place and release all the prisoners, and that kind of is the start of the overthrow of the French monarchy. The king at the time was Louis XVI. His wife was Marie Antoinette. So anyway, that happened in 1789. And on this day in 1968, Henry Aaron, Hammer and Hank, hits his 500th home run. And by the way, I don't think there's anybody with 500 home runs or more that wasn't implicated in steroid use that is not a Hall of Famer. Yeah, so if you hit 500 home runs and you never tested positive for steroids, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. On this day in 1969, Easy Rider was released. Dennis Hopper, Jack Nicholson, and Peter Fonda. On this day in 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti, who were Italian anarchists, they were convicted. They would eventually be executed. To this day, so that's 102 years ago, to this day, their case is controversial. You know, like, there's a lot of people that think they were framed, and that they were, you know, treated unfairly, treated inequitably. So there's that. And also on this day in 1881, Billy the Kid is shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett. And just a little side note here. On this day in 1882, so a year later, Johnny Ringo, who was a gunslinger from, well, actually, no one knows a lot about where he was born or when he was born, but he was found dead in Tombstone, Arizona. It was ruled a suicide, but it possibly could have been a murder. He was opposed to the faction of the Earps and Doc Holliday. You've probably seen the movie, but yeah, Johnny Ringo found dead this day in 1882 in Tombstone, Arizona. And man, you know, Tombstone is got to be pretty hot this time of year. Maybe he just died from like heat stroke or something. Actually, he was found with a bullet in him, so it's said that he had been drinking excessively and was despondent. So there you go. Okay, so Lyle just did a video, and I know I'm kind of copycatting here, and but it's a sincere form of flattery to copy somebody's work. So he was talking about the traffic in Atlanta, and I'm gonna say this. Lyle's one of my favorite YouTubers. He's probably number 2 behind me. But he said some stuff that I was like, well, I don't know if that proves anything. So he was talking about the traffic in Atlanta, and he said how he went through there and, it wasn't much of a thing. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I've had that happen to me. But that doesn't prove that the traffic's good in Atlanta or not good in Atlanta. And so let me just say this. Traffic is bad for me for reasons different than it's bad for somebody that is driving a car or lives there and is commuting. I commuted in the DC and Baltimore area for years. Traffic is known to be bad there, but sometimes midday traffic was horrible for whatever reason, right? Could be a construction zone and stuff like that. But I wanted to, Lyle's information is what is called anecdotal, right? It's based on his experience. I have some empirical data, some empirical information that's based on studies. There's actually global traffic studies. There's no city, the number one worst traffic in the world, I believe, is in London. The highest ranking U.S. city is Chicago on the world map. But in the U.S., because I don't drive my truck to England anymore, they jacked up the tolls for the tunnels, so I was like, nope, not taking loads to England anymore. The number one city, as you might imagine, Chicago, and I'm just going to go down these, but then we're going to talk about them. So Chicago, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Houston, and Atlanta. That's the top 10. Now, these numbers are based on the average amount of time that people spend per year sitting in traffic, right? And the idea is that sitting in traffic is counterproductive, right? It's a use of time for which people have no compensation that they want, which is to say they're not recreating, they're not with their families, and they're not at work earning any money, right? Now, when you talk about truck drivers, a lot of professional drivers are getting paid by the hour. So if a taxi cab sits in traffic going to the airport, they don't really care because the meter's running, right? Even an Uber driver, it might be a flex time or whatever they have there, it might be high volume. They don't care. They're getting compensated for sitting in the traffic. Technically, we're getting compensated for sitting in the traffic because we're at work. However, if you run by the mile, then sitting in heavy traffic is not really paying you a lot. Okay, but here's the thing. You got to consider the differences between what matters to a trucker and what matters to just the general public. First of all, truckers are really pretty much stuck to certain roads, right? Certain highways and arterials, we'll call them. And other people can just go wherever they want, right? Like when I had to commute into, DC or Baltimore, or even in Montgomery County, I had an office in Bethesda for a number of years, which is a very close-in suburb to DC. It's inside the Beltway. I had all these hacks, right? Now I wasn't the only one that had a bunch of hacks, right? Because whenever I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go this way, because this is all backed up, and I would listen to the radio. 75 other people were doing the same thing, driving down the same residential street with speed bumps and four-way stops everywhere. But that was just how, people got around. Like, every road is fair game. And that's how even where I live now is out in the sticks, but during rush hour, every freaking road, like, you could be driving down a road, all it is farms, but it's like bumper to bumper traffic, right? Heading towards some bigger highway or some freeway. So, but I want to come back to Atlanta in a minute and explain a couple of things, because I got nothing but time. So okay, I'm gonna go back down this list: Chicago, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, DC, Houston, Atlanta. Of those 10, at least 8 of them, so not Atlanta, not DC, every other one has geologic impediments to traffic that are really major choke points, okay? And what I mean by that is this: Chicago, you can drive through Chicago north to south, but you can't drive through Chicago east to west. I mean, I guess technically if you're already at the lakefront, you can go west, but you're not driving because the lake's there, right? You can't get on 290 and just keep going 50 miles past the loop and end up in Michigan. Why? Because there's a big lake there, Lake Michigan, right? Same thing with Boston. You can't go east out of Boston. Not very far before you get wet. New York City, their geologic impediments are several. First of all, every borough in New York City, save one, which is the Bronx, is on an island. Yeah, that's right, Brooklyn, Queens, you're actually on Long Island. Look at the map, okay? So because of all those islands, all that water, right? You got the Hudson River, the East River, the Harlem River, you got the Verrazano Narrows, Raritan Bay, whatever you want to say, it's all water, okay? So you have bridge after bridge after bridge, except bridges are always choke points, right? And there's only one interstate there's a lot of interstates that go towards New York City, but only one that really runs through, and that's I-95. That's the Cross Bronx Expressway, GW Bridge. Everybody knows that's insane. Everybody avoids it, right? So you got to go around, right? You got to go through Jersey. Maybe you go through Long Island, or, go up to the Cuomo Bridge, whatever. Everybody's got their strategies, but New York's impediments are water and bridges. Philadelphia, similar impediments, not quite as bad as New York City, but water, bridges, right? The Delaware River, it's a big deal. Schuylkill River comes in right in Philadelphia. The other thing that these older cities have that hurts them when it comes to traffic is just density, right? The older the city, the denser it's going to be, right? Cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, densely packed because they're old cities. They've been there since the 1600s, okay? And so people are driving on streets that are 400 years old, okay? The buildings are not that far apart. So then you get to Miami. Now, Miami's not an old city, but impediment, right? The Atlantic Ocean. And also, it's basically the end of the road. Unless you're going to go out to the Keys, like I-95 ends in Miami. So unless you're going to the Keys, it's the end of the line, right? Well, 8 billion people heading down a road that ends, it's going to pile up, right? So that's one of the impediments with Miami is, water, and it's kind of the end of the line. Los Angeles, water, and it's the end of the line, right? If you could build a beltway on the west side of Los Angeles or the south side of Los Angeles, because actually you can go west on the 101, up into Ventura County, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like if they try to build a beltway from, where the 210 comes out all the way back around to, say, the end of the 405, it's not going to happen, right? You're going to be in the water. San Francisco is a lot of geologic impediments, bridges and water, huge water impediments. The other thing is San Francisco proper is a very densely packed area. That peninsula that San Francisco's on, very densely packed. San Francisco is actually a pretty old city for cities on the West Coast. So that brings us to DC. DC does have a water impediment. It's the Potomac River. But typically, and there are only 2 bridges on interstates that cross the Potomac. They're both on 495. Now, DC is kind of unique in that you could run I-95 through DC, but they didn't do that. And I'm not saying I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. Well, it's bad because what you then do is combine 95 and 495 around the east side of the Capitol Beltway, causes choke points, because now you're running 2 roads, 2 major interstates, 2 major highways on one set of lanes. I'm grateful that 95 doesn't run through DC. I think it would make interstates destroy neighborhoods. And once a neighborhood's there, it shouldn't be torn apart for an interstate. And perfect example of that, and by the way, interstates typically tear up low-income neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, blue-collar, working-class neighborhoods. Look at Indianapolis. I mean, you could see houses and streets that are at a certain angle, and you look across, same thing. And then there's no bridge, no connection. Tears up neighborhoods. It hurts the fabric of cities. Baltimore, they were going to put I-70 through, and then they built this. There's this expressway to nowhere. It's actually technically US 40, and it just tore up people's property, and it's useless mostly. I mean, you can get a few blocks quicker, but it's worthless. So that's DC. Not a ton of impediments. Does have a beltway that goes all the way around. Although they keep talking about an outer beltway, another Potomac River crossing, etc. Houston, number 9, again, Gulf of Mexico, water impediments. Also, Houston is really low lying. It's hard to build. I mean, I know there's a lot of roads in Houston, traffic is crazy, but it wouldn't surprise me that the bayous and the low-lying areas are considerations for highway construction. But again, Houston, you can't drive straight from Houston to Miami, right? You got to go around the Gulf of Mexico. And so that brings me to Atlanta. Atlanta is really the one city on that top 10 list that has no geologic impediments, right? Now Lyle mentioned Denver. Denver's not on the list, but Denver has geologic impediments, right? How are you going to build a beltway around the west side of Denver, right? It's right up against the mountains, right? You could do it, but man, that would be a lot of work, and it would cut through some really rich people's neighborhoods, like up in Evergreen and Conifer and stuff, Golden, wherever. That's one of the issues with Denver. Same as it's kind of an issue in Salt Lake City. I mean, there's the 215, but it doesn't get you. You're still going through a densely packed urban area on the 215 in Salt Lake City. So Atlanta, I think this is Tim Travel's crack transportation staff has done an analysis, and based on that analysis, I believe the biggest there's 2 huge problems in Atlanta. The first problem is that the Atlanta Beltway, right, 285, when it was built, was really a poor job done of anticipating future growth. in that it was built too close to the center of Atlanta. In other words, the circle around Atlanta is pretty tiny compared to circles around other places. That's the first thing. So you look at like how long does it take to get from the Beltway into the city? Like look at Boston. There's 495 is not a complete circle, but it's still way outside of Boston, right? Like you get to that quite a ways outside of Boston. And that's one of the keys, right? But here's the thing about Atlanta that I think is most vexatious for truck drivers. Every single commercial vehicle that's going through Atlanta must get on 285. That's not true in Columbus. It's not true in Indianapolis. It's not true in Denver. It's not true in Los Angeles. It's not true in Houston. I can't think. It's not true in Dallas, Fort Worth. There's no city no big city that I can think of except like I-35E in St. Paul. There are restrictions for commercial vehicles, but I can't, like in Chicago, if it's got an interstate sign, you can drive a truck down it, man. You want to go 94 through the city, 90 through the city, 55 all the way in, 57 all the way in, 290. They don't care, right? Trucks can go everywhere. But in all these other big cities, right? Atlanta is the one city. Atlanta has 3 big interstates that run through it, that intersect in the city. And it's the only city I can think of where you have 3 big interstates and you are not allowed to drive a commercial vehicle through the city. You can make a delivery off of one of those roads, 75, 85, or 20, but you can't just transit the city. You can't go from, say, Columbus to, to Petersburg, Virginia on 85. Well, actually 85 doesn't go through Columbus, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like you got to go around 285. So what that means is that everybody that's commuting, right, from the suburbs, if they don't live right on 75, 85, or 20, odds are they're getting on 285 or some other road that feeds in there. But then what they've done is they basically said, hey, we got all these roads going through here, and even in the middle of the night, you're not supposed to drive through there. That's a huge impediment to truck traffic, and I'll tell you why. Because first of all, it adds miles, right? The second thing though is it is truck traffic just trying to go from, Chattanooga to Macon is impeding the 285 where people are just trying to commute from suburb to suburb, right? Like the idea, the thinking was back in the day that everybody would always head towards the main core city, downtown, to work. Well, that's just not true anywhere anymore. And I think the freeways in Atlanta, it's just a monumental lack of vision. What they built, and now there's just more construction on the same road that's not good enough to begin with, and that makes no sense. I think the solution to part of the solution is to open up at least 20, for example, to through traffic, or one of those 3, but maybe all of them to through traffic. Okay, that's the first thing, except maybe hazmat traffic, right? Hazmat has to go around the Beltway. That's the first thing. But the second thing is making another like a 270 degree circle or 270 degree loop where you loop from east of the city on 20 east of Atlanta, over to 85, over to 75, back over to 20, and down to 85. And maybe even back to 75 down by like McDonough. You know, there's that one section from 75 over to 20. You probably don't need the extra there because you do have 675 that shunts off a little bit of traffic. But, you know, Atlanta's a crapshoot, and the reason is because of how trucks are controlled. I think that traffic is easier to deal with when you have more route selection. You know, but whenever you go into Atlanta, through Atlanta, you have to plan extra time because you have no options. I mean, you could go left or right when you get to the 285. You can go one way or the other, but really, and you know, the thing is, I feel like a lot of people come in on 75 south and then go on 85 south. You know, so that everybody's going to take that way. And you know, here's the other thing, and this may be going back to anecdotal. Traffic is bad when you're sitting in it. When you're not sitting in it, you really don't care. You know, but anyway, Atlanta, it could be easy or it could be hard. It's like any other big city, right? If there's one little problem, man, things go to hell in a handbasket. So anyway, sorry, Lyle. I don't think traffic in Atlanta is great, but I think it could be better if they'd had more vision. Other places have excuses, you know. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and happy Bastille Day to all my Francophiles out there, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.